Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to today's discussion where we're going to be talking about Path of Exile 2 with some of the details that we found out from Exilecon and specifically focusing in on this discussion today about what's exciting about Path of Exile 2. If you're new to the channel, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about future video discussions just like this one. We've still got a couple more discussions this week coming up with the aftermath of Exilecon where we are taking a different look at a couple of different perspectives on a couple of different things that got announced, like Path of Exile 2, Path of Exile 1 and its future, as well as 322 in the upcoming Trial of Ancestors League. So all that is yet to come, and today's discussion is just going to focus in on things to be excited about that are coming in Path of Exile 2. I've got a couple of thoughts to share about each of these different topics, and so we'll be chatting about them throughout the day. This is going to be a more fluid and ongoing discussion than it is going to be a presentation like what our normal discussions are around here. So, what's exciting about POE 2? Well, first off, there's new systems. That's right, this is a completely new game, and so that means there's going to be some new systems. The way how gems are going to work, including changes to damage multipliers and more focusing essentially on gems providing alternative mechanical options rather than just slamming more damage onto things, that's going to be a change. New systems include new characters, new character models, new character designs, new Ascendancy classes, new passive tree, new itemization. New systems, right? Like in the trailer, as well as throughout the gameplay, we saw lots of new weapons in action. We saw lots of new skills in action. We've got a new system to come to Path of Exile, which is the dodge roll system. We've never had that before in Path of Exile. That is all brand new to Path of Exile. So new systems. It's a new game, right? Like how many of us, realistically, this is part of the pushback that I've got for the community that's upset by POE 2. And by the way, I'm upset about some things as well. That's going to be another discussion. I'm just trying to stay positive here today on what's exciting us. This is a new game. Like what community could have a beloved game where we're going, hey, there's going to be a second iteration of it. There's going to be a sequel. There's going to be an expansion of a franchise. There's going to be a building of that brand into a new future iteration. Like how many people look at expansions and look at games and go, yeah, I don't want that. I don't want more of my favorite game. Now, of course, it's controversial because it's not the same game, right? It's going to be different. Path of Exile 2, by nature, is going to be different than Path of Exile 1. A clear line in the sand has been drawn, and for some people, that's very, very exciting. A lot of people don't like Path of Exile 1 in its current iteration for various reasons. A lot of people have enjoyed Path of Exile from time to time. Maybe they've tried it out, but it's never really had sticking power for a huge swath of people inside the gaming community. So a new game that is different, that is a distinctly different game from Path of Exile 1, is going to be something that is very, very exciting to a vast and wide audience. Now, whether or not that's got staying power, time will tell, but that in and of itself, a new game that is completely separate with a separate end game, a separate campaign, that is something to be excited about for a great many of us. This includes, as a new game, new itemization, new character models. I remember, does anybody else remember, or are you just, is it just a few of us who are going gray and balding and our children are growing up and we're thinking about, you know, our children going and getting driver's license and those sorts of things and making later on in life decisions? Anyway, is it just us? Is it just the geriatric portion of the population that I am gradually aging into? And by the way, it will happen to you as well. Are we the only ones who remember back in the day, Path of Exile, early on, right after it had been released, there was discussion about, hey, can we get updated character models? And early on, there were discussions on the forums, there were discussions amongst streamers, there were discussions when there was still an ongoing avenue between developers and the community in a much more casual sense. Now it's very much more formalized. It's still good, by the way. GGG does a great job communicating. Don't hear me critiquing that. But does anybody remember a decade ago when GGG was like, hey, we'd like to do some new character models and we'd like to update the visuals and the presentation and the visual experience, both of the player's character as well as the enemies that you're interacting with, as well as maybe the minions and the environments that you're interacting with? That's all coming in POE 2. One of the primary things that I said when I first started playing Path of Exile, this was not in 2016, This was in 2013 when my good friend first showed me the game, and I was still playing some other games, which will go remaining nameless, some other action RPGs. And I came in and I played Path of Exile, and I was like, I can't see anything. Visually, it hurts my eyes to actually tell what's an enemy, what's the environment, what's not. Like, I can't differentiate these things. That was difficult for me. And so this is thrilling. This is exciting. We're getting new character models. We're getting new environments. We're getting new visuals. It's going to be a visually and sensibly, tangibly different game, and that is an exciting thing for many of us. This also is accompanied by a new story, right? The story is set 20 years after Kitava, and so 20 years after this, it means that there's a lot of lore that can be incorporated in, and not only a lot of lore incorporated in that gap of 20 years, but I imagine we're going to see a lot of lore shaped around this new big bad boss that is here that wants to exterminate or get rid of the corruption at whatever the cost. That is going to bring with it a whole new endgame, a whole new slew of characters that we no doubt will be making jokes about, just like what we do even presently right now with heist characters and betrayal characters and all of the others who are a part of the various NPCs that we've interacted with throughout the story and the campaign of Path of Exile 1. So we're going to get a whole new story, a whole in-depth amount of lore, and that lore, again, isn't just going to be about 20 years in the same exact instances. It's going to be from different perspectives, from different agendas, and from different angle points. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that opens up. And frankly, from a lore standpoint, just from a lore standpoint, I know we don't focus in on lore around here very much. More often, we're chatting about economics, and we're chatting about in-game mechanics, and we're chatting about builds and those sorts of things. But just from a lore perspective, just for a moment, let me nerd out. Can you see how running two simultaneous games, from a lore perspective, gives you an opportunity to leave Easter eggs and crumbs in Path of Exile 1 that you would then pick up on in Path of Exile 2, or vice versa. You can preview things in the future playing through Path of Exile 2 of breadcrumbs, and you can actually see how those things, those tragic events in Path of Exile 2, or those cataclysmic events, or those exciting events, or those happy moments that come in the future in Path of Exile 2, what's the genesis of them with endgame expansions that might still be added on with lore from Path of Exile 1. So that's really exciting to me. Also, new combat. We talked about dodge roll. We've all seen lots and lots of videos from Exilecon about players essentially having a more tactical, a more strategic approach to combat, where there are multiple different options for you for your active skills while you're engaging with specific enemies, meaning that there's hopefully going to be, for players who enjoy this style of gameplay, a more interaction-based, a more thoughtful base for you to choose your skills and how exactly you're going to approach the task at hand, the monster at hand, the boss at hand, the map at hand, the act at hand as you are shaping and building out your character. So new combat is going to allow for, the last thing on this list, a general new feel and rhythm to the game that we have not had in Path of Exile necessarily before. Now, I can already hear some people saying, yeah, a rhythm like Ruthless, a rhythm like a slower version of Path of Exile 1, a rhythm that's maybe more in line with other action RPGs that are popular on the market or have come out recently. Guess what? A lot of players want that. I'm not saying that's me. I'm not saying that that's my personal opinion, but I'm saying for a lot of people who are excited about Path of Exile 2, that's what's exciting to them. A lot of players look at Path of Exile 1, not all of us, a lot of us who have played for a long time, we're not of this opinion, but a lot of people look at Path of Exile 1, they'll watch a streamer, they'll watch a video, they'll watch a build guide, and then they go into Act 1. I know this because I've taught people the game for years. They'll go into Act 1 and they'll go, well, how do I get to what I saw on the screen? And it's really unmotivating to go, well, you need your associate's degree, your bachelor's degree, your PhD, and then you need to write a couple of treatises and books and defend them, publicly, and then give a TED talk on your character. And by that time, maybe by the time your beard has reached the floor and your second child now has grandchildren, you too will be able to have a character that looks something like the character that you saw on YouTube, on Twitch, etc. A lot of players don't like that. A lot of players want to be able to sit down and start playing in an environment that looks like what they're seeing on their computer screen, on their phone, etc. It's one of the reasons why some games, like World of Warcraft, allow for players to purchase top tier end game character level boosts, right? That happened way all the way back in Draenor with World of Warcraft, where when you first purchased the game or made a renewing subscription, I forget what the business model transaction side of things were, but you essentially got a free level 90 character boost, so that way you could jump to the end game with other players who are already at end game and you could skip all of the leveling. Now, I'm not advocating for that. That's been a long-term tension inside the Path of Exile community. Hey, let us skip the campaign. We just want to go to endgame. I'm just talking about the feel for new players. New players, when they get in, a lot of the time nowadays, players don't like to have the level of patience that it requires for you to learn and explore a gaming environment and a game's system that will expose you to all of the different plethora of options and opportunities that you'll have to make your decisions for building your characters. A lot of players nowadays are coming to learn about action RPGs and about games in general from streamers and from online sources that simply show a very powerful top-tier version of a particular game. And so when a new player comes in, they go, I want to look like that. I want to look like the player who's been playing for 1,000 hours this 3-month cycle and just looks like an absolute demigod. How do I get there? The answer is, for a lot of people in Path of Exile 1, you don't. So a new feel and a new rhythm that might translate the game in terms of its look, in terms of its aesthetic, in terms of what the screen is communicating to the player who's new, that is something to be excited for. A lot of players who have looked at Path of Exile 1 and gone, I have no idea what the heck is going on the screen, and I have no idea how to get there, and every time I Google this, I can't seem to find somebody who's concise enough and who's precise enough and who I actually want to listen to explain to me how to go from point A to point Z. So Path of Exile 2 is very exciting for that. It's a new feel, it's a new rhythm, it's lots of new learning, and new players are going to come along with that, which means new excitement and new energy in the community at large. Shown in one of the trailers is this beautiful, wonderful ocean crashing cliffs scene with, quote, 100 distinct environments in Path of Exile 2. I would like to remind folks, grinding gear games oftentimes reuses assets. And so if there are new environments that are being made for the campaign, they will no doubt show up in whatever form of endgame will be in Path of Exile 2, whether it's maps or something else. Could it be something else entirely? We don't know. We don't have that many details quite yet. And frankly, GGG has switched things on us in the past, like saying Path of Exile 2 would be a continuation of Path of Exile 1. So who knows? We don't know what the end game is going to be yet, but we do know what it will probably look like. It will probably look like reused assets from 100 distinct environments. One of the things that I noticed as I was watching the trailer and watching the different gameplays was the cutscenes, the artwork in between on the loading screens. It looks a lot more detailed than what Path of Exile 1 looks like. And so visually, Path of Exile 2 looks like a stunning experience, from load screen to in-game to actually seeing your character viscerally deal their damage or perform their skills or incoming damage, bosses and their telegraphed abilities or bosses and their random abilities that you didn't know were coming. All of these things look absolutely incredible. And so these distinct environments, these distinct backgrounds, these distinct pieces of art look absolutely gorgeous. It's going to be very interesting to see whose PCs can actually handle Path of Exile 2. I had gotten my PC that I'm recording and using now for so many different games. I had gotten that late last year, early this year. We had done an unboxing video of that. It was a top-end PC at this point in time. Whether or not it's going to be able to run Path of Exile 2 is really going to be interesting, because the further you go in pushing your engine and your visuals, oftentimes the smaller your audience actually comes. The game is being designed for the next generation of both PlayStation, PlayStation 5, and Xbox. So it's going to be very interesting to see just how much power and how much horsepower is needed to actually provide the visual, stunning displays that Path of Exile is promising to deliver. So very exciting there on the environmental visual side of things. 600 new monsters are coming to Path of Exile 2, and I've got to say, if I need to run through the prison and kill another one of the necromancer guys who just keeps summoning things, like that guy, he was one of my most dreaded enemies when I first started playing Path of Exile many years ago, and eventually you get sick of killing the same stuff, right? Do any of you remember, is it, I believe it's Act 1, is it the climb right before you get to the prison? Do any of you remember when they added in the monsters? I think it was when they released Act 6 through 10, or maybe it was Act 5 through 10, I think. Yeah, there we go. Act 5 through 10. Does anybody remember when Fall of Oriath came out and they brought in the skeleton bone guys on the wheels? and then they retroactively like went back in and added them in at certain points throughout the campaign. Does anybody remember that, or is that just me? Anyway, when that happened, that brought a new life and a new flavor to the campaign. Was it like world changing? No, but it was exciting in and of itself. It was a nice little thing that was different as you experienced your campaign gameplay and went towards the end game of Path of Exile 1. Well, imagine now you never see the same monster twice. Like, let's say for maybe 2 leagues or so that you don't even notice that these are the same monsters. Maybe even 3 leagues, maybe even 4. What if it's an entire year that you go, oh, I've never even seen that monster or recognized that monster before? Because there's 600 different monsters in the game. That's a lot of different visual telegraphed abilities to keep track of, to be aware of, and to keep looking for. By the way, I know that I am a big-time Necromancer player in Path of Exile 1. I've just got to say, 600 new monsters means there's a lot of potential here for some inspectors and for various other potential new skill gem iterations for summoner players. So that's pretty cool. That's really exciting. We will see just how expansive, just how exhaustive the list of specters is, and really, truly how unique each of these monsters are. If they're just copy-pasted some sort of new kind of reused skills put on top of a different skin, well, then that might look a little bit cheesy. But if this is 600 monsters with a various wide-ranging assortment of skills at their utilization for us to see and interact with, potentially be killed by, and to hopefully kill them before they get to use it, then that's going to be something that is very engaging and very exciting throughout the life cycle of Path of Exile 2. Did I mention Path of Exile 2 might have a life cycle? Does that mean that Path of Exile 3 may be coming at some point? When would Path of Exile 3 be announced? But anyway, we'll leave that for spoilers for another day. Okay, there's 100 new bosses that are coming in to Path of Exile 2. Honestly, off the top of my head, I don't want to do the math about how many bosses exist inside Path of Exile at the moment. I mean, we've got a whole atlas that's got a bunch of different monsters and a whole bunch of different bosses. And so I don't want to dispute and argue about what's the specific number in Path of Exile 1. I just want to say this is kind of exciting to see. We're not just reusing all of the old stuff from POE 1. We've designed 100 bosses. Now, maybe sometimes there will be some level of reuse. We know that Grinding Gear Games really loves to reuse their assets. So we'll see. Maybe 100 of these bosses are truly unique. Maybe there are 100 bosses that have truly unique visuals and truly unique abilities and truly unique environments and truly unique rewards that they will offer. We will see when Path of Exile 2 comes, but for the moment, just that tagline of having 100 bosses in the game is something that's interesting unto itself and a reason to be excited about Path of Exile 2. Okay, this is where I'm going to lean back just for a moment. 1,500 passive skills. Does anybody remember back when Delirium came out, and some of us were stoked more than others with the vast array, the overwhelming horde of new skills that we had at our disposal to play around with on the passive tree? One of the biggest, oldest, and longest lasting memes and inside jokes inside the Path of Exile community is when you take a new player and you show them the passive tree for the first time, right? That's a joke. It's a joke because players, before you play Path of Exile, many players have got a rather rigid and, I dare say, compared to Path of Exile, a pretty small concept of what an RPG character could be. What sort of different builds, what sort of different archetypes, what sort of different actualities they could realize on their character as they're trying to throw together some cobbled mishmash of utility skills, damage skills, and support skills to progress their character through the game. When players first open the passive tree in Path of Exile 1, it blows their mind. We are all about to go through something similar to that when we get to dissect and play around with another huge and separate passive tree unto itself in Path of Exile 2. Path of Building players, beware. I mean, a lot of us spend time when we're not playing Path of Exile, that's still our hobby time, thinking about Path of Exile in Path of Building, just messing around, playing with stats in Path of Building. So the fact that POE 2 is going to have 1,500 passive skills for us to interact with new keystones, we'll get to new ascendancies and characters overall in just a minute, that in and of itself is very exciting. Now, I do have to just make one small comment here. Is this actually a picture of Quinn, by the way, in the portrait of this character? I don't know. But anyway, I thought it would, when I saw it, I thought it's that Quinn's character. Anyway, 1,500 passive skills is a ton of passive skills for us to be considering. How many of those are travel nodes? How many of those are actual keystones? How many of them are actual key nodes, major, minor nodes? How many of them are actually going to be build defining? How many of them are going to be designed in a way that is somewhat akin to, maybe like a cousin, not quite related identically, but somewhat related to that early Path of Exile 1 concept of here's a very strong ability that is also going to come with a very heavy drawback. Are passives still going to be designed in that way? Is there a new philosophy that Grinding Gear Games is taking on with this new passive skill tree? And so there's a lot of questions about how this is all going to shape up for when POE 2 actually hits the ground running in that closed beta section that is coming a little over a year from now. I mentioned Ascendancy Classes a moment ago. There are going to be 36 of them. That's right, 36 new Ascendancy classes that are coming with Path of Exile 2. That's a lot of Ascendancy classes. It was a huge debate for multiple years. Multiple years. YouTube, dear friend, dear community member, do you remember? Not long ago, we were debating whether or not players should have to do the Labyrinth at all to get their Ascendancy. Do you remember that? Do you remember those discussions? It wasn't that long ago. Seriously. Players were going, well, maybe POE 2 will just get rid of Labyrinth trials. Well, maybe POE 2 will have a new Ascendancy mechanism whereby which we don't have to be searching maps and constantly hoping and guessing, maybe in an SSF environment, whether or not we'll finally get our last Ascendancy point or not. 36 new Ascendancy classes, also coming with a new way in order to actually ascend as a character. This is something that is exciting to me because it says that while Path of Exile 2 is separate from Path of Exile 1, there are still some of these very firm building blocks that are going to continue. In other words, while Path of Exile 2 is a distinct game, it is separate, there are going to be some hallmarks that overlap, Ascendancy Classes being one of them. I'm very excited by this. There was some nervousness that I had prior to Exilecon that we were going to come out with some like pre-canned character class kind of restrictions. And here you go, you pick this and we'll give everything else to you to play with in a sandbox, but we'll make it more character restricted. I'm very glad to see that that was completely unfounded and that we are still looking at multiple different base classes that then spread out into subclasses that will be beneficial to your character and provide more options for you to play with. Speaking of options for you to play with, there's going to be 240 active skills. Now, we need to start breaking this down as soon as we see this. I'm excited about this. I'm just hopefully helping us catch a glimpse of just how many different archetypes and characters this could be. Let's say, for instance, that there's 6 different skills that you've got on your character. 6 divides into what? 24 4 times? Okay. So if you've got 6 different skills, all active, right? And this is the base game that's being dropped when it comes out. 240 skills with the base game. We know that Grinding Gear Games has got a long and storied history of adding new skills each and every league patch. I would assume that would continue moving forward with Path of Exile 2 as a game that is continually under development, that is continually being supported by Grinding Gear Games. So we're starting with just 240 active skill gems. If that sounds like a low number to you, consider if you've got 6 active skill gems on your character, that allows for, I don't know, like a gazillion different permutations and different combinations of you to use those active skill gems. Now, do active skill gems mean aura gems? Do active skill gems just mean, hey, you press the button and it instantly happens? How many of those active skill gems are going to be in some way support-ish? Are those going to be movement abilities that are active? Are those going to be defensive active abilities? Are those going to be purely offensive abilities? We don't have an exact breakdown of all of these things quite yet because the game hasn't released and everything is subject to change until the game releases. And if you don't believe me on that, then just see Exilecon 2019 when they said it's going to be one continued game, right? Things change over time. So this list of 240, I would say, is going to be a minimum of the active skills. We don't know which of the categories each of those skills is going to fall into yet. But I just want you to recognize the mind-boggling number of options that you've got. Path of Exile 1, over the course of a decade of research and of gameplay development and of iteration and of releases, has given us many, many different active skills. But those active skills in and of themselves, we oftentimes find don't all make sense. They don't all work together, nor do they work in such a way where they're particularly exclusive from one another. Oftentimes there are some gems that seemingly overlap, but they don't work that well together. Conceptually, there's some thematic overlap there, but you would choose one and not the other for different situations. Certain channeling skill gems come to mind, certain single target projectile skills come to mind. There's a lot of different skills that are out there that you just go, you know what, this is sort of like this other skill gem, but it's not quite, and this one is therefore just better. I would never use this active one. So there's still that design kind of flaw of just having so many different skills. Sometimes some of them are going to feel the same, and it's possible that that comes out with Path of Exile 2 as well. But for today, thinking of what's just exciting, we've got 240 active skill gems, and some of them are going to include transforming your druid from one form into another. That's really cool. How many of these new active skill gems are going to be based from minion-based players? Oh, this is awesome. What if they finally give us like that ultimate Spectre gem that we have been hoping for years, where not only could we Spectre minions, regular minions, what if we could Spectre bosses? How awesome would that be? POE 2 is a space where if GGG was going to do something like that, this is the time where they would do it. So 240 active skill gems really allows us to run wild with our imagination and with our hopes and with our excitement with all of the new things that are coming in POE 2. Well, I just gave you my list of some things that are exciting me about Path of Exile 2. In addition to these things, just to rattle off a couple other things that are quick, that aren't worthy of a slide, as it were, or a 5-minute discussion. But it's exciting to me that our cosmetics and our purchases from Path of Exile 1 will apply into Path of Exile 2. How that's all going to work out logistically, you know, are we going to have 2 different EXE buttons? Are they going to be stored on the same thing? Is there going to be errors? Or are people going to have complaints? Or sometimes there's going to be transfer errors? I'm sure there will be bugs in the system, but hopefully all things will work out. That's something that's exciting to me. Path of Exile 2 being free to play. I know a lot of you aren't going to necessarily be excited about that. You're just going to take that for granted. That's something that's exciting to me. The fact that Grinding Gear Games isn't coming out with like this massive bait and switch of, hey, here's more than a decade's worth of work that's all been free to play and you can support us. Well, here is a game that you can pay us $70, which now apparently $70 is like the new $50. Does anybody remember when AAA titles were like $50 or when they were $30? Anyway, nowadays they're all $70 to $90, depending on which mount you want to pick or which stupid extra cosmetic thing you want to get. Anyway, Path of Exile 2 is free to play. How thrilling is that? Like, the definitively best action RPG company on the market for the last decade is making another game, Path of Exile 2, and it's going to be free to play. That in and of itself ought to be a sales pitch to get anybody who's enjoyed any of the work Grinding Gear Games has done or seen any of the promise or potential of what they've done over the last decade to go, all right, you've got my attention, I'll at least download it and give it a shot. It's a lot better than a lot of other companies that have come out with $30, $40, $50, and $60 iterations of their game that haven't even turned out to be playable online with your friends on day one. So anyway, lots of things to be excited about with Path of Exile 2. I'd love to hear down below in the comments any corrections you've got for me today. I'm sure I spouted something that was incorrect, so feel free to respond with any corrections and any fixations down below. Also, I'd love to hear what's exciting you about Path of Exile 2. What did you watch at Exilecon and go, yes, that's got me excited. I can't wait for that to come. What exactly about Path of Exile 2 has you hyped and has you going, I would like to have the closed beta access now, please, Mr. Wilson, if I could. Anyway, drop us a comment down below. I'll interact with each of them as I've got time. Thanks so much for joining us for today's discussion. Stick around for later on in this week where we have more discussions about the aftermath of Exilecon, including discussions about what we're not so excited about with Path of Exile 2, as well as the upcoming 322 Trial of the Ancestors League. Speaking of which, I hope the upcoming 322 expansion is the League, a Mirror of Calandra, drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.